Well, hello, New Life. Glad to have you joining us for the message this week. When our son, Andrew, who just celebrated his 36th birthday this year, or this past week, when he was about 12 years old, he saved up enough money and he bought a PlayStation video game console. And one of his favorite games to play was Madden NFL football. And periodically he would rope me into playing along with him. I kind of enjoyed it and all, but the reality was he came to know that game so well as he would play it by himself, play it with his buddies. And when he sat down to play it against me, I would just get like totally massacred in it, all right? And I didn't have the faintest notion sometimes of what buttons were supposed to be doing what. And he'd run up the score to like 65-3 or something like that. And his favorite thing to do was to pretend that he was broadcasting the game, but to be doing it in French, because we lived in Africa at the time and his French was really, really good. And so he would just be insulting me and inventing French phrases to just ridicule me like crazy. We laughed so hard. There are times that we'd have to stop the game when something he would say would have me just rolling on the ground with laughter, tears just streaming down my face at this 12-year-old boy who just could tickle my funny bone in unbelievable ways. Andrew had a favorite defensive scheme that he liked to use in the game, and he was always the Minnesota Vikings, of course. And if Nancy and I heard the game console say it once, we heard it say it 1,000 times, where he'd set his defense for a play that was coming up, and then the announcer over the console would say, "The Vikings are coming out in the dime package." I had no clue what in the world is the dime package. In fact, for 20 plus years, I haven't known until just this past Wednesday when I looked it up online. Oh, that's what it means. The terminology was just totally foreign to me. He knew all what it meant. He was well versed in it. I didn't have a clue. Understanding words, even familiar phrases, sometimes can get past us, but understanding them well, it matters. So today in our look, as we're continuing the series on commitments to building solid relationships, especially building solid marriages, we're going to be considering a fourth commitment. Now, we've already said that solid relationships need to be characterized by, first, a commitment to forgiveness and to confession and forgiveness. Solid relationships need to be characterized, need to have a commitment to growth and to change. It's not just confess it and do it again, but confess it and change it and then grow. And then the last few weeks we've looked at the concept of solid relationships need to have the commitment of building a bond of trust. And here's the fourth commitment that we're going to be looking at. We must commit to building a relationship of love. Now, I know what some of you are thinking right off the bat. You're saying, "What, Larry? Seriously? Who doesn't know that?" Please don't check out yet, okay? Listen to me on this, okay? Here's why. Because understanding words matters. And my guess is that you would agree with me on this, that we have millions of people all over our country. We have hundreds probably right here in the Aiken area alone who would characterize their relationship, their marriage relationship, as being a relationship of love. But they have such a warped understanding of what love is. Is it just like lust? Is it sex? Is it taking advantage of the person? What is it? They have such a warped understanding of love that while they might say, ours is a relationship of love, God would never describe it that way, right? You know that to be true. I know that to be true. There's sometimes I think God would look at my approach to relationships, key relationships with my wife included at times and say, that doesn't look like a relationship of love. So we've got to understand it better. Terms are important. Understanding words matters. Understanding words the way that God understands words matters most. All right? So what if even our understanding of love as Christ followers was misguided? Wouldn't it be wise if we just kind of backed up and said, hey, let's take a look at that description of what love looks like and what love doesn't look like. Maybe we could find out a little bit more about what this means to have a commitment of building a relationship of love. Let me expand on that, okay? Because it certainly could be reworded this way. We must commit to love in a way that resembles the deepest expression of love that God shows toward us. We must commit to love in a way that resembles the deepest expression of love that God shows toward us. You put it in that terms. You want to know something? I know I've got a long ways to go yet. You do too. Because the deepest expression of love was exemplified toward us on the cross. And I don't think I'd be all that willing to be crucified for a whole lot. If we could fully understand the love that we can experience with God in our vertical relationship with Him, then that could transform the love that we build in our horizontal relationships with our friends, with our families, and with our spouses. So several Sundays ago, some of you might be aware of this, even if you don't attend the church here. I woke up on a Sunday morning. It wasn't a Sunday when I was scheduled to preach here at the church, and I had some tightness in my chest, and I got a little bit concerned about that. And that was about 4 o'clock in the morning, and by 9 o'clock, it was, I think I might be wise to get this checked out. What I didn't want to do is come here and then have it get really, really bad, and all of a sudden there's an incident happening right during church. And so Nancy took me into the emergency room. And the nurse and the doctor came in and were trying to assess if I had any symptoms that were consistent with heart failure. And after a fairly thorough assessment, they looked at Nancy and they said, "You're right, he has no heart at all." No, that's not what they said. But I could obviously, it was obvious they were in their mind. They didn't have a sheet or anything. In their mind, they were like checking off boxes. Nope. Okay, blood pressure seems to be okay. His heart rate is fine. Don't see anything on the EKG that they ran on me. His chest X-ray looks good and all. Nope. And I went away from there feeling assured that, okay, there isn't probably, the symptoms probably aren't connected with my heart. All right? So we're starting this week, actually, maybe with the hope that you can see a few things and check them off as nope. This isn't characterized, this doesn't characterize my relationship, but the reality is, don't be so quick to check those off in the no category, because I think for some of these that I'm going to share, you'll have to check them off in the, yeah, I see myself there, okay? So we're going to consider what symptoms would indicate an absence of genuine love, okay? A lack of love, a love failure, if you will. And I want to share with you 4 indicators, all right? The first is this: frequent disunity. Frequent evidences of disunity between two people. And again, in a marriage, all right? So when the word love gets up or surfaces in some type of spiritual context, and when the word unity surfaces in a spiritual context, immediately in my mind I go to the Last Supper that Jesus had with his disciples. And in particular, I go to the Gospel of John, where John has 4+ chapters that revolve around Jesus' last final gathering with his disciples. In John 14 through 17, those chapters, it's clear that they're saturated with the concept of love. And by the time you get to chapter 17, where Jesus is praying a final prayer over his disciples, unity becomes front and center, and love and unity get merged together in the most important words that Jesus wanted to have ringing in his disciples' ears as they were going to watch what he was going to be doing on the cross within 24 hours. John 17, verse 20. Verses 20 through 23, summarized this way. Jesus is praying now, and he says, he's praying to the Father. He says, I pray also for those who will believe in me through the disciples' message, that all of the disciples may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I in them, and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them, even as you have loved me. Love, unity, just revolving around those 4 critical verses, all right? In this part of Jesus's prayer, this is what he's making clear. Love and unity cannot be unlinked. Unity in marriage can be unlinked, all right? You can have a marriage without unity. You can have a marriage without love. But you can't have a loving marriage without unity. If you don't have a lot of unity, you simply will not have a lot of love evident, okay? And vice versa. If you don't have a lot of love evident, well, along the way, you're going to see that unity isn't present as well. So this past Sunday, this past weekend, watched a football game that I was actually kind of excited to watch it, okay? So Vikings never win a Super Bowl. You know I've talked about that and all. But the Detroit Lions, okay? Listen to this. The Detroit Lions hadn't won a playoff game in 30 years. We think it's bad to be a Vikings fan. For 30 years, they haven't even won a playoff game. But they had a pretty good team this year, and they played a tight playoff game, and they won it by a score of 24-23. And within the next couple of days, I saw a video of the locker room, the celebratory locker room for the Detroit Lions afterwards. And there was something that I looked at and I thought, oh, wow. The type of stuff getting said that I would never associate with a football team made of tough guys, right? Yeah. Over and over in 3 different speeches that were made, short speeches, okay? First by the coach, and then by the general manager, and then a little bit back to the coach again, and then by the quarterback. Over and over again, they said, I love every one of you guys. I love all of you guys so much. Now, granted, they wouldn't define love in biblical terms, no question about it. They're not talking about romantic love. Obviously, they're talking about a brotherly love. You know, hey, you guys, I'd give my everything for you and all. But their depth of commitment, their depth of, I can say the word affection and appreciation and dedication to each other, it was evident. And it was that depth of love that would breed incredible amounts of unity, and that unity led to success on the field. I wish them all the best this coming weekend. I wouldn't mind if the Detroit Lions actually win the Super Bowl, all right? If unity is missing, though, love becomes brittle, and love eventually withers away. So, when speaking about love and unity, we are not talking about sameness, okay? Unity is not sameness, okay? That locker room included almost infinite types of differences. Heavy guys, light guys, slow guys, fast guys, guys with great hands to catch a ball, guys with good feet to kick a ball. Black guys, Hispanic, white guys, leaders, followers, leaders, backups, support players, brilliant strategists, certainly Christians, probably Muslims. On and on and on it goes of the differences in that locker room, all right? But sameness isn't required in order for us to have unity. That locker room is kind of like a little bit of a microcosm of the differences that God has instilled throughout all of nature. All right, we have hundreds of thousands of different species of plants and animals, millions of different types of species. And God made them different because God is this creative being that values differences. Don't get me wrong, God values diversity in that sense, okay? Not diversity the way it's spoken about these days and all. But God loves the differences among his creations. God created you different from me, and that's a good thing. God created my wife differently from me. That's a wonderful thing, all right? But he wants us to live together in unity in spite of our differences. In fact, I would argue with you that couples that have too many similarities may have never felt the need to develop a deep, grace-filled, tolerant, patient love. Why? Because they never disagree on hardly anything. All right? Listen to this. Unity results when love intersects with differences. Unity results when love intersects with differences and actually trumps the differences. Love prioritizes unity and is willing to make great sacrifices to achieve it. You want to know what would make Jesus? He spoke of this. May I be in them, the disciples. May there be unity between us, me and disciples. Father, like there's unity between you and me. You know what would cause that? The great sacrifice on the cross. All right, so disunity indicates that you don't possess enough love to prioritize the other person's desires over your own. How often do you give in and let the other person have their way? The more disunity that there is, the more absence of genuine love. So that's the first one, okay? Here's the second manifestation of the absence of love that I want to talk about today, and that is simply this: conflict. All right, now be careful not to arrive at the quick conclusion that if you don't experience much in the way of evident conflict or visible conflict or external conflict, that you have genuine love, all right? You want to know something? There is something really, really, really unhealthy about Minnesota Nice, okay? Because Minnesota Nice can be a terrible facade that hides simmering conflict underneath. And at some point, it might end up boiling over. All right? So, subtle digs that we can make at each other. Choosing the silent treatment when your family member has hurt you. Indirectly shaming someone. Those are indications of conflict without the appearance of conflict. Now, in teaching practical truths about love in Romans chapter 12, Paul writes this. It's a verse I've spoken of before, all right? Romans 12, verse 18, if it is possible, he says, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Here's what he's saying. Love loves peace and hates conflict. Now, here's what Paul is saying. Paul is saying, do everything within your power to live as people of peace. And when it says live at peace, that phrase live at peace could also be translated as cultivate peace. All right, like cultivating in a garden. All right, here's what he's kind of referring to. This is a work. Okay, this takes effort. All right. This might take a while to flourish. It might not just be a process that happens really, really quickly. It is not necessarily automatic. It is not the default setting for relationships, I don't think. All right? Because the default setting for gardens isn't flourishing plants. The default setting for gardens seems to be weeds. I think God has kind of hardwired or allowed a lot of that to be hardwired into us after the fall of mankind, after the fall into sin. Okay, so listen to this. When you love someone, you put into retirement the weapons that are particularly effective against the other person. I shamelessly use some weapons still. So these are some weapons that I think need to be put into retirement, but still can surface. We drag up past offenses. We refer to socially embarrassing moments that the other person endured. We strut our intelligence and let others know that we know it better than they do. We heap guilt on the other person. In some relationships, romance gets withheld. Here's my guess, okay? You have seen or you have been around married couples when they have publicly done some of these things. Yes, Christians too. Yes, even right here in a church context, I've seen some of it. And you have probably as well, all right? And they would all, and everybody that I would have seen doing any of these things here at this church, okay, they would all probably say that their marriage is characterized by love. But would God say that? Does that fit within the description, the definition, the term that God has in mind when he uses the word love? I don't think so. Listen to this. If conflict with the person that you love doesn't bring sadness or regret to your heart, if not immediately, at least somewhat later, something's desperately wrong. If conflict doesn't still bring you sadness or regret, then something is wrong. If hurting the other person is something that you quietly relish, love is absent. And you probably, one of the both of you, are probably not doing all that you possibly can. You are not doing as much as it depends on you to live at peace with that person that you live with or live in close relationship with. A third indication of the absence of love is this: misunderstandings. Okay, so first one is disunity, second one is conflict, third one, misunderstandings. Now I'm not talking about the minor things like you're out grocery shopping and your spouse says, hey, pick up the morning blend of Caribou coffee, and instead of getting morning blend, you get confused and you get the Colombian blend or something like that. I'm not talking about those types of misunderstandings. All right, we should pay attention to the little things that important people are telling us and all that show what their small preferences and are. Talking a little bit more big picture stuff on this, okay? Talking about like uncaring, often purposeful misunderstanding of what lies in the heart of the other person. So in the Old Testament book of Isaiah gives us many glimpses of the pain in God's heart when his people Israel reject God's love and choose to fall into idolatry. And this is all happening in pretty close proximity to when they're taken away into exile, all right? But the book of Isaiah, the longest book in the Old Testament, the book of Isaiah, it might not be as long as the Psalms, okay? It's one of the longest, okay? The book of Isaiah starts this way, okay? This is Isaiah chapter 1, verse 2, okay? Verses 2 and 3. Hear, O heavens, listen, O earth, for the Lord has spoken. This is what the Lord is saying. God is saying, I reared children and brought them up, but they have rebelled against me. He's talking about the children of Israel, okay? I have reared the children of Israel and brought them up, but they have rebelled against me. The ox knows his master. The donkey knows his owner's manger. But Israel does not know. My people do not understand. My people do not understand. Misunderstanding. All right? So in that opening chapter, and I encourage you to take the time to read it and all, it's just one of these, the passion of God's heart to connect with his people is so strong, and it just isn't happening any longer. Right? In that opening chapter, God declares that Israel is still doing prayers, all right? Israel is still doing their sacrifices. They are still practicing Sabbath rest. They are still gathering for worship. But it also says that at the same time they're doing all of this stuff that really one would think would be connected with blessings from God, they're putting themselves in a blessable position by following God's directives to them in those areas at least. No? It also says that the country is in ruins, that it wasn't thriving, and that nobody can connect the dots. Nobody can understand what's really going on here. Verse 3 points it out right away. Israel does not know. My people do not understand. Here's what God is saying. He's saying that his people are connecting to God from a deep, are not connecting to God from a deep informed understanding of the heart of God who chose them. All right? They're practicing all the externals as outlined in the law of Moses. All right? But that chapter also includes indications that their leaders were practicing corruption, that as a nation they were ignoring justice, that they were compassionless in the face of widows who were struggling or orphans. Misunderstanding cripples their relationship with God, and it destroys that love relationship that they have with God. But it's the image in verse 3 of a donkey knowing his owner's manger that just like jumps out front and center, okay? And it makes me smile, right? Because throughout our 11 years that we lived in Africa, whether we were in a village or in the big city of 1 million plus people that we lived in, donkey carts are everywhere in Burkina Faso, all right? On the long dirt road going out to the Christian high school that we helped develop, there was a typical scene that I would often see in late afternoons. The guys who owned donkey carts, they used them to transport stuff. They were the poor person's pickup truck, all right? And that's how they made their money, okay? They would get a load of something from here and they would take it somewhere else, all right? And all day long, 6 days a week, 7 days a week for some of them, they would deliver loads of concrete blocks or loads of gravel or sacks of grain or huge bags of charcoal for fire, for their fires. And at the end of the day, on that particular road is where I remember seeing it on several occasions. When the last load would be delivered, the owner would get back to the road and point the donkey to get up on the road, and the donkey would get up on the road, and the cars would drive right past it, and people walking, and bicycles and motorbikes. He literally had 5 different speeds going on that road at any given time. And they'd get up on the road, and once on that road, the owner would get in his cart, and he would lay down and take a nap. It was so hilarious to see, because periodically you'd see donkey carts lined up. You'd see like 6 in a row, and as you'd be driving past them, might only see like one of the donkey cart owners who was awake. The rest would all be sleeping, and yet on and on and on the donkeys would go. Why would they take a nap? Because the donkey knew where home was. The donkey knew where food was. The donkey knew where the owner's manger was. A manger is a place for food, okay? For animal food. The donkey knows where it gets its life. It knows that it shouldn't veer off the path. It knows that it shouldn't risk the wrath of the owner by veering off the path. You see, harmony between the owner and the donkey was maintained by, whether the donkey realized it or not, by a mutual understanding of what was important to the other one. Food was important to the donkey, and taking the owner home was important to the owner. This is what God is saying about the lack of understanding between God and Israel. He is saying, even a donkey understands the essentials that it requires, the essentials for life, the essentials to make sure it doesn't get beaten by the donkey cart owner, the essentials for an agreeable future for the donkey that includes a full belly and a good place to lay down that night and to get its rest, because the next day it knows it's going to be pulling the load again. Even donkeys understand their masters better than you, Israel. Understand your God. Donkeys understand their owners better than Israel understands their God. What donkeys do for food and for survival, listen to this, we often don't do for deeply satisfying relationships. And what I mean by that is donkeys understand the people who are important to them. They understand the expectations of the people. How much do we misunderstand the most important people in our lives? I came across this line and I couldn't forget it. It is self-love that fills your brain so full of what you think and know that you have little room for your spouse's thoughts, concerns, or dreams. Would you listen to that again? It is self-love, unhealthy self-love, that fills your brain so full of what you think and what you know that you have little room for your spouse's thoughts, concerns, and dreams. So I want to give you just an assignment here, okay, to build better understanding. Ask yourself this question in a meal sometime, or when you've got an hour to talk about it a little bit more in depth. Just ask this very simple question. What is your greatest fear? Husbands, ask your wives that. What's your greatest fear? What's your greatest fear in our relationship? What's your greatest fear about life? Wives, ask your husbands that. Make them be honest. They might say, I don't fear anything. Come on. Let's be just transparent. Okay, fear resides to a certain extent in all of our hearts. We're human. We can't escape that. All right, we can live with it reasonably well. All right, now I need to briefly mention the fourth indicator of an absence of love, and that is this: disrespect or incivility. All right, I mentioned this a few weeks ago. Ladies, there probably isn't anything that wounds a man more than public disrespect. Okay, for most men, it's the wound of all wounds. All right, now let me be clear. Respect should be mutual. It should be reciprocal both ways. There's no question about it. And to be honest, I think I've observed men publicly belittling women more frequently than the other way around during my lifetime. All right? But ladies, hear me on this. This is particularly painful for men. All right? 30 years ago, when my wife came to start understanding this, here's how sensitive she came to this reality. She threw away all of our Berenstain Bears children's books that we had in the house that periodically we would read to the kids, because she noticed a theme throughout virtually every single one of them, and that is that the Papa Bear was a bumbling idiot, and the Mama Bear was constantly belittling the Papa Bear, and sometimes I think the kids were doing, the smaller bears were doing it as well. And my wife didn't want our kids to conclude that dads were always dumb and moms were always right. Maybe she just wanted the kids to not look at me ever and say, hey, I've been reading a book about a guy like you, Dad. In Paul's most focused writing on marriages, in Ephesians 5, he ends the chapter this way. Ephesians 5 verse 33. However, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself. And the wife must, it doesn't say love their husbands, it says, and the wife must respect her husband. He purposely says respect. And I think virtually every culture manifests that this is true. I can't tell you how many hundreds of times over the years I have cringed inside when I've watched a wife belittle or disrespect her husband in front of me and in front of others. Something inside my heart dies for the men when I see that happening. I thank God I am so blessed that my wife isn't characterized by that approach to our relationship. I can think of specific people in every American church that I've been a part of, including this one, recently. I can think of specific examples in both Nancy's side of the family and on my side of the family. Particular names. And if I mentioned them to Nancy, she would nod her head and say, you're right, I see it too. And sadly, what the wife often doesn't realize is that far from spurring her husband on to become better by needling him in public about his shortcomings, most men are going to be more prone to withhold tender love in return. Disunity, conflict, misunderstanding, disrespect. To the extent that these are present in your relationships, God's type of love will be absent. Honestly, some of these pop up in our marriage. Honestly, I've seen all four of them here in Aitken, all four of them here in New Life Church. If I didn't see it, I wouldn't be preaching this message. Now, I want to leave you with a wonderful definition of love, and hopefully, and I'm going to unpack this next week. Unpack this next week, so hopefully you'll stick around or come back again. There's a wonderful definition of love. Love is willing self-sacrifice for the good of another that does not require reciprocal love in return, and also doesn't require that the other person is deserving of that love. And that definition describes the cross, the place that gives us the best description, best definition of what love looks like. Let's pray. Oh God, you must look down from heaven at us and say, you call that a relationship of love? That type of love, my type of love, it doesn't include that type of disunity. It doesn't include major misunderstanding. It doesn't include visible or internal conflict. It doesn't include disrespect. We really do have a long ways to go, God, because we just say our relationship is based on love. And you up in heaven would not come to that assessment for a lot of relationships in our lives. And so would you convict me more by your Holy Spirit? Would you do that for people who are watching here, God? Would you help us to take a good, solid look in the mirror and say, yeah, something needs to change, so that our love looks like the love that we see on the cross. I pray this in Jesus Christ's name for each person. Amen. Thanks for joining us. Come back next week.